to chart undiscovered territories.
Thank you, Rachel, and everyone here at Instead. I had amazing conversations with a lot of you. Adriel, I very much resonate with your story, and we'll have to share that offline afterwards. So today, I want to talk about where we are and what is emerging that may take us out of this reality that we're currently embedded in. I want to talk about the concept of flow, the idea of how we evolve as a society, how we perceive or take in information, how we decode that information, how we transmit that information more efficiently than we did before. In other words, how we evolve, and see that it's a recurring pattern that we, if we're mindful, we can actually start to become more intelligent instead of blocking that flow by the ideas that we think with, not understanding how we decode it, and not having the language and the means of transmitting it forward. So this first slide is to just show you that, less than maybe a couple hundred years ago, people actually used to believe that if you rub dog poop on your eyes, you'd clear blindness. And so we want to think we transcended beyond this, but the world is this. We would not drink the word water if we were thirsty. However, we chase a symbol called money as if it represents wealth. Isn't wealth supposed to be the evolutionary intelligence that moves life forward, the information that moves life forward? So if you can't drink the water or eat the food or breathe the air, is that really wealth? See, I tracked on a lot of things. I looked at the mythology of Joseph Campbell. I see what's happening in innovation processes. I see the processes from systems thinkers like Fritjof Capra and Pierluigi Luisi, who talked about autopoiesis, or how our natural systems learn, and they essentially follow the same pattern. The pattern is, the very first, you look at information as what is essential, and then you figure out how to order that information. In other words, you go through some kind of a struggle and ordering process, and then you come to an elegant order that you can apply in the world. So you can look at this metaphor multiple ways, and what we see in the world today is that first step. We see contradiction in the way the world works. We see that contradiction is often limited to context, and we see how that context has a possibility of converging into something greater. So what's really blocking the flow? Well, contradiction and context and convergence. So let's look at contradiction. So yesterday there was an announcement that this battery is going to take homes off the grid. Ironically, there's 6.5 unoccupied homes for every homeless person in this country. Interesting, right? So is this new energy? Not really. Energy technology has been around for a long, long time. We've solved these problems long time ago. So much so that about 4 years ago, I wrote a 400-page book about decentralized peer-to-peer energy solutions using everything from biomimicry to nanotech to electromagnetism all across the spectrum. So is there a food shortage? We think that's a problem. Well, what we have mostly is a misdistribution of how food is allocated and how food is produced. So people died of hunger today, yet we have an obesity epidemic. We don't really have technology that's in the way of how food is produced and can be distributed. Do we have a water shortage? We talk about that. We talk about the drought in California. And we see a lot of the same thing. We see a lot of misappropriation, misallocation, and we see that that people don't have drinking water. Nearly 1 billion people don't have drinking water, yet we waste water on everything from fracking to bottled water to you name it. So that's not exactly true either. Mostly what we see is how we manage and misappropriate resources. And so many people say, well, there's a population problem. We have the world's population growing out of control. Well, I tracked this about 4 years ago, and this is from a website called Per Square Mile, and it basically says that if we live the footprint of, let's say, how people live in Houston, it would take about half the size of the United States for all the world's population to fit and live comfortably. If we had the population density of Paris, we'd fit in half the size of the state of Louisiana. At the same time, we are depleting our soil. So better government, I'm not going to go there because we already know the answer to that. And we see the system is precarious. It's based on premises that this just sounds kind of ridiculous. Like, I owe you for something that I don't know yet, but I'm going to back it so that you can keep on continuing this game. At the same time, we have exponential growth in innovation. We have amazing things popping all the time, and with the advent of robotics, machine learning, nanotech, self-replicating nanomaterials, 3D printing, making gold in the lab with microbes, all that stuff is happening concurrently. So why is this? Well, I would say our current socioeconomic system needs to invent false problems that science and technology has already solved. Because why is this bad? And why is this good? And this is supposed to be bad because, and I smelled some of this just earlier, that's why I was pointing this out. This is bad for paper, plastics, healthcare, pharma, police, legal, prisons, war, and business as usual. And this is good, right? This motivates people. I'm not so sure about that. So on one hand, we have this. On the other hand, we have this. Contradiction. On one hand, we have the ability to actually map the genome and start to really understand how we're constructed and how we interact with our environment and all the things that are coming together with integrated sciences like neuroscience and genomics. On the other hand, we have this. We need sick people in order to keep this particular industry going. On one hand, we have automation that makes most of the road jobs that we do obsolete. Yet, there's the rate of unemployment, underemployment, and non-employment is pervasive. So, are we overlooking the obvious? I think so. I think we need to look at something that's much more direct. Banking is the biggest industry in the world. Debt is their most profitable product. Debt collectors or capitalists need to externalize cost and need to prevent innovation. Because if someone figures out this coherence piece, then they're out of business. And so we created a system of centralized currency which doesn't really create transaction and value exchange. What it really does is create concentration of wealth and inequality. So speaking to the VC model, this is the direct example where you see that in exact place. So what do? So how do we bridge this gap? how do we bring this together, and how do we go into this promise that everyone's promising but yet it's not manifesting? So one way to look at it is really look at things in context. What works in one aspect does not scale to another. For example, in terms of an organism, the property of temperature is very important. If it gets too hot or too cold in here, we're going to die. At the atomic level, it's irrelevant. And in the same way, when some things work in a particular context, they don't necessarily scale into another. So one of the ways to look at this is the way we look at transactions. So I was speaking to John earlier about and this is based on Jean-Francois Noubel's work on collective intelligence. He's been doing this for 12 years. And one of the things that he found out was that our innate collective intelligence naturally fosters a gift economy. In other words, when we can see our action relative to the impact of the group or the benefit of the group, we don't care about what we're going to get in exchange. So how this thing came together, how we interact with our families, it's all about really bringing a gift that's going to benefit one another. That's why Burning Man works in that context. And soon as we start to scale out of the group, soon as we start to think that the other is different from us, that's when we get into transactions. And we've now amplified this transaction model to such an extent that we're creating some craziness. We're trying to create one-size-fits-all solutions that solve one problem and create a multitude of others. And this cartoon is a very good example of what the pharma industry does. So, for example, the way we look at capital, okay, when we have scarce physical resources that need to be secured in order to build infrastructure. So in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, capital equals materials plus labor plus time. That makes a lot of sense in that context. Today, we have things ephemeralizing all the time. So our distributed ability to, with costs going down all the time, it hardly plays a role. The stuff that used to take buildings to hold now fits in the palm of our hand. So things are dematerializing all the time, but yet I find it funny why something that has no production cost, like for example an ebook, why does it cost again when I switch from a Kindle to my iPad? It makes very little sense, but yet we account for it that way. So really today, what we're talking about is the new capital is really creativity. In other words, how do we make things more coherent? How do we make things flow? How do we make things make the labor, the material, the energy required to produce something be less and less? So we've always focused on the bottom line, and in the bottom line scenario, we have the consumer, we have the producer, we have the lender, we have the consumer. So we have this role of somebody who connects producer to consumer, and everyone has a different incentive in making that happen. But yet, what's happening now, because we've actually invented ways to communicate directly, the middleman role is now in question. Now the producer can actually be both a consumer and a lender if they so choose, and so can the consumer. So why do we really need a lender in the first place? This is an abomination. And I don't know if you realize what this actually represents. I don't fault this woman for running this business because she has no other option in this configuration. But she is selling cuddling for an hourly fee, and she sells overnight cuddling for $500 or something like that. Okay, so we've kind of come to a point now where human intimacy has become a commodity, and that's really sad, and that's really unfortunate, and it speaks to where we are as a society. So we can start to do things differently in context. So in context, we see things that are emerging right now. Right now, in this country, there's about 67 some complementary currencies that are about facilitating the transaction flow within a community that does not extract the value out of the community, actually keeps the value inside the community, and is transitioning into, like what I was mentioning before, it's more of a gift economy in context where it can be a gift economy. We can actually start to do things, create the services that exist today. My friend Jared has this website called Tradeja, which is about contextual value exchange. In other words, if my chair may have a market value of $300, and your bike may have a market value of $200, but I don't need my chair and you don't need your bike, so we can do that exchange. And it has nothing to do with the metaphor of market. It has to do with what we value something in context. So all values are arbitrary relative to other values relative to what we feel they are worth when we think they're worth. Okay. One of the things that's emerging right now in the decentralized space is distributed automated corporations, distributed automated applications, and so they're called DACs, DApps, and distributed automated organizations, DAOs. I'd like to take this one step further. I think one of the things that we could be doing is really have software manage the mechanics of ownership. In other words, ownerless, autonomous organizations where resources actually act in their best interest to optimize or stay relevant, because there is no human emotion attached to resources. So we can have 360 credible products that own themselves, including your car, your house, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we see today, for example, things like Bitcoin, things like complementary currencies, they get co-opted. Right now, about 12 people own 70% of the Bitcoin, and I was actually in a meeting with some of the Bitcoin founders and PayPal guys trying to run a boiler room game on Bitcoin. And when you see that, you realize that basically what's happening here is because you have an external value underlier. In other words, the value of Bitcoin is only relevant as how many dollars you can exchange for it in the outside market. People try to run that same game. Until you have an abundant currency where you have internal network value creation, and we can actually start to do that where decentralized software is today. So that starts to create a different way of looking at the world. We start to see the things that were very human, that we really understood at human scale, but that we could not manage in the old paradigm because we did not have the software and tools to be able to regulate those things in a cost-efficient way. So these ideas are no longer wishful indigenous musings. They are actually part and parcel of who we are as a society and who we start to actually be together as a whole. So one of the things is that, okay, that all works if you can actually make it work, and we know there's some software that does things like this. Things that are happening in the peer-to-peer world speak to this, but we don't know how is it going to scale. We have the same problems because what's valuable to you may not be valuable to somebody else across the street. So how does this thing scale? Well, I think we look at what convergence really means. Because if you understand that we exist in symbiosis with everything else, everything that we are is in relationship to everything else around us. My being here is in relationship to you. You being here is in relationship to me. And so everything connects to everything else, and there is a common point of convergence in every context. And so we now have the softwares to start to look at that as a whole. So now the idea that one size fits all, or that there's a singular solution, or if you focus on one thing that's going to solve a larger systemic crisis, we start to see that's not the case. We start to see that every piece is an integral piece to the whole, and each one of us is integral to one another's efforts. And so we bring something unique to the table. I remember earlier, I think James was speaking about this whole thing about being in groups. And I think one of the things that, going back to my earlier point, that what we produce most is debt. We produce this artificial debt that we have to pay back. And so all the activity that we create, the team activity we create, is in order to pay that debt, whether that debt is to our employer, whether that debt is to our investor, whether that debt is to the bankers who founded the investors, and so on. So it's this artificial thing that we don't necessarily have to agree to, and we don't necessarily have to fall in line and operate like machines when the machines can do our jobs way better than us. Sometimes the machines can do our jobs way better than us. Right now, it seems to be stuck. Wait, hold on. There we go. Okay, wait. Oh, hold on. I gotta go back to my slides. 1 second. So one of the ways we can create common context is, let's look at the example of LEED buildings, for example, or zero net energy buildings. The people that finance these buildings and the people that design them come from completely different mindsets. So one group is really looking to improve the environment, lower the footprint, and really create a regenerative energy ecology around the things that suck most of our resources, which is our buildings. And another group really wants to minimize costs. They're still operating from the mindset of externalizing costs, and so they're looking to reduce their fiscal waste. So what they have in common is waste. And what all of us find in the way we generate our relationships, the way we interact with groups, the way we interact with each other, the very first thing in initiating a friendship or connection of any kind is look for the common thread. And now we have the software to be able to manage those contexts and show those common threads. And so that what happens, how LEED buildings get produced, we can actually apply that logic across all kinds of human activity. So this is something that I was discussing with John earlier, something that my friends and I have been developing for a little while. We looked at peer-to-peer internet protocols that does not require a centralized server in order for exchanges to happen. We looked at all the knowledge base that's around peer-to-peer decentralized technologies, and we looked at the kind of things that are emerging in the decentralized application space like Ethereum. And we thought, what if we put this thing into device agnostic space, and it could be a device where we can actually start to create human exchanges that does not require the middle layer of this debt-based currency. We can make up our own currency rules, we can make up our own business rules, and we can adhere to those business rules very much the way a DApp or a DAC or a DAO works. And that gives rise to something very interesting. So for example, we can start to do something, let's say, in the skills to resource exchange marketplace. So all of us have talents that we can do effortlessly, yet the market doesn't necessarily reward us for our talents. All of us have resources that we don't use all the time, yet the market doesn't value those resources the same way we value our resources. However, where we are in terms of machine learning, where we are in terms of imperative and declarative programming, where we are in terms of being able to create matching engines, we can actually serve up those contexts to do a direct exchange and create a game-like space where we can actually create front-end business models in the way the world works today to create a higher level of education and skill to make what people do naturally more relevant, and to be able to exchange that for the resources they want directly without the middle layer of an extractive currency system, without the middle layer of a debt-based economic system, without the middle layer of guessing what the future holds, because we actually know that future now. One of the things is we manage risk, and what is risk other than things that you don't know and you have a story around? We actually can start to measure impact relative to agenda. We can actually start to measure our actions relative to assumptions, we can actually start to measure our creativity relative to whether or not it benefits the network, and we can actually start to create measures to convert how the world works today into the way that we know how we work with one another, how we work in relationships, how we work in our social software. So I think we can do a social software upgrade just as a starting point. Now, I want to tell you something about who we are relative to all this, because I think that's a very important thing. And so I'm going to leave you with this very simple story. So this, technically, many of us are familiar with. We've seen this, right? We know that, our perceptual range, the brain, for example, measures about, I think, 580 hertz of electromagnetic activity. Our sensory perceptual range is between 3 and 8. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're missing out on. We don't see the entire visual spectrum. We don't understand the whole sonic spectrum. We can't smell everything. So there's all kinds of stuff. So we're making assumptions based on a very limited set of perceptions that we're projecting and perceiving, so on and so forth. Okay, we are in symbiosis. Most of our body is essentially microbes, and a very small part of it is actually our cells. So we exist in relationship to everything else anyway. So who we are is a very key thing in the way we construct our world. When all we can see is a village, you want to be chief of the village. When we can see a town, we want to be chief of the town. When we can see the world, we want to, we think of world domination themes. When we can understand space, we want to go and be overlords in space. So it's really about our relative perception of who we are, because the only thing we can really be certain of is that I exist, and this rest of it could be a virtual movie. And so I order my existence relative to everything else that I can perceive, and that in and of itself is how we see the world, where it's iterated based on limited information and limited communication. So I'm going to leave you with one very simple story, and I'm going to ask a question. The story is of a disillusioned guy. He went through a lot of personal development, personal angst, and trying to find the truth, trying to find the meaning in life. So he tried everything. He tried drugs. He tried polyamory. He tried, he tried traveling. He tried everything from hot yoga to massage to all kinds of stuff. And he still couldn't find the truth. So he finally said, I'm going to go and I'm going to go to where a lot of spiritual traditions are born. I'm going to go to India. And in India, I heard of this guy who knows the truth. I said, okay. All right. So he goes to India. And he treks around for about a month, and he finds this little man, his guru, and he knows where, and he comes to him, he says, do you know the truth? He says, yes, I know the truth. And so he said, okay, so tell me the truth. He says, well, the truth is a process. You have to go through the process. And so he says, okay, so what's the process? He says, well, you see, I have a stable over there, okay? In the stable, I have lots of poop. I need you to clean the poop, okay? So I need you to do this for 10 years, and then after 10 years, you will know the truth, and you come back, and I tell you the truth. I said, okay. So he goes, and he shovels shit for 10 years. He counts every day, he marks it off, like, oh, a year has passed, a month has passed, day has passed, so he's counting to the day. So on the 10th year, he comes back to his guru, and he says, okay, I've done my 10 years of, shoveling your barn. Tell me the truth. He says, it's the same as I told you before. The truth is, you are. He said, what do you mean? I shovel shit for 10 years. He says, well, how much longer will you shovel shit before you realize that the truth is you are? And that's it. So the truth is you are, truth is we all are, and really what I understand from studying everything from neuroscience to psychology to socioeconomics to all this stuff, what I realize is no one knows shit and nothing is under control. The reality is what we make of it. So there's two questions I want to ask you. Okay? Which of these statements is a statement you can get behind? Number one, I know where we're going, let's go there. Number two, I got your back. Okay? For me, when people say I got your back, that's when I know, because we're going into the vast unknown. All we really have is each other, and when we have each other, we have everything, and technologically, everything is possible if we can imagine it so, and if we have each other, we're going to figure this shit out. Thank you.